Good morning, my friends. I am Kori Schake. I have the great good fortune to lead the Foreign and Defense Policy team here at the American Enterprise Institute. And I am delighted this morning to showcase not only AEI's own outstanding senior fellow, Zack Hooper, who is, I think, the free world's leading expert on alliances in Asia, but also the three heavy hitters of Asia policy in the administration: Dr. Mira Rapp-Hooper, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Asia Pacific Policy and Oceania, and Dr. Ely Ratner, Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Indo-Pacific, and also Ambassador Dan Kritenbrink, the Assistant Secretary of State for Asia, all of Asia, right?
East Asia Pacific.
East Asia and Pacific.
Yep.
He's a career ambassador, served in Vietnam and also in Tokyo. Where else?
Beijing.
Beijing.
Kuwait.
And Kuwait. So we are going to have about an hour's worth of time. We're going to leave the last 20 minutes for your interrogation of these officials and of Zack. And let me get us started by asking you, Dr. Rapp-Hooper, we get a lot, I see a lot in the ecosystem of questions about what is the end state the United States is going for in our relationship with China? What is it we're trying to achieve with competition, et cetera? It looks to me like the answer is pretty obvious, that what we've been seeking across several administrations is a China that plays by the rules. Is there a different or better answer you would give to that?
It's a great question, Kori. And I'll start by saying thank you for having us. And thank you to Zack for organizing this terrific panel today. It's always a pleasure to appear alongside Ely and Dan, two great and trusted colleagues. We work together on almost every aspect of the administration's policy, but it's really a privilege to be able to talk to you today. So Kori just posed a question about what is the end state with respect to U.S. strategy for China, but I might actually open the aperture a little bit more broadly, because what we're here to do today is talk about the administration's regional strategy, which absolutely includes China and our competition with the PRC. But when we think about our end states for our Indo-Pacific strategy, they are certainly broader than just about that bilateral relationship, and they really relate to the region that we want to see now and well out into the future. And as I tee up to answer the question, I do want to note that we are in a somewhat unusual and privileged position when we talk about our Indo-Pacific strategy. Usually in government, when a team has the opportunity to work on a strategy, whether it's a regional or functional strategy, and Kori knows this better than any of us, it is a document which can be really important to guide internal teams, to coordinate interagency strategy, but it's pretty rare that 3.5 years into a president's term, we're still pointing to the strategy as kind of the lodestar of the way we make policy in a given region, much less in a position to say that we've made remarkable progress on that strategy, and that perhaps in some places we've actually been privileged to exceed our own expectations. But we are in that position with the Indo-Pacific strategy, where certainly some aspects of it have been very challenging, but many aspects of it have gone, frankly, better than we might have expected, might have had any right to expect. And a large reason for that is that this is a strategy that is predicated on building collective capacity with allies and partners, encouraging them to step up alongside the United States in new and innovative ways. And many of those allies and partners have done so beyond any measure that we could have anticipated 3 years ago. Case in point is Japan, but we could look at the Philippines or Australia for examples of that as well. So when we look out into the future and think about what does success for the Indo-Pacific strategy look like, not only next year, but 5 years from now, it looks like something that we are starting to see the contours of very much now. It looks like a region in which the United States and its allies and partners are closely aligned in what we're seeking in the region, which indeed is a free and open region that is stable and in which China is encouraged to play by the rules and does so. It looks like those allies and partners partners stepping up and taking on leadership roles in ways that are nonetheless in close coordination with the United States. And it looks like those allies and partners increasingly working together, sometimes with the United States and perhaps sometimes in configurations that mostly include themselves. So it is those mini-lateral groupings that we so often talk about, in the context of the Quad, US-ROK-Japan relationship, now US-Philippines-Japan, but it is also those increasing linkages between Australia, India, Japan, the ROK, that create forms of cooperation that are increasingly organic and self-sustaining. It is essentially the creation of a new regional architecture that helps to reinforce the Indo-Pacific against all manner of challenges, whether they're coming from the PRC, the DPRK, climate change, or any number of other threats and challenges. And at this way station in our Indo-Pacific strategy, 3.5 years in, it is far too soon to say that we have been successful, but I think it is fair to say that we are on our way to building that architecture in a way that sets us up for long-term success.
That's great. Thanks, Mira, for the framing. And part of why this is so critical this week is because Eli, Dan, and their bosses are heading out to the region. We're not exactly sure when everyone's leaving because the dates are shifting around a bit. But I know we've got a 2+2 coming up with Japan, 2+2 coming up with the Philippines. We've got Osman with the Australians as well in early August. And then as well, we've already had announced trilateral with the Korean defense minister and the Japanese defense minister. And then Dan, I know you and Secretary Blinken are heading out to a whole range of places.
Indeed.
Laos, Vietnam, Singapore,
Mongolia.
Mongolia, in
we
addition.
May have a couple more before we're done, I'm not sure.
They're trying to get all the frequent flyer miles they
Exactly.
can. So we're really delighted to have you here to talk not just about the broad strategy, but about the specific implementation the next couple of weeks. So Eli, why don't I start with you perhaps on the Japan 2+2. There's been a lot of work on US-Japan issues, and I know all three of you work deeply on these. The announcement we have already for the 2+2 in Tokyo specifically mentioned extended deterrence as a major aspect. Can you talk a little bit about what you have in mind for that 2+2 in Tokyo?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll just first of all start by saying thank you to Zack and Kori. It's always wonderful to be here at AEI. This continues to be a really important institution for the policy discussion in Washington, and we look to you and your experts all the time for insights to inform our work. And as Mira said, it's wonderful to be here with Dan and Mira. We talk almost every day. This is the first time the three of us have appeared together, just the three of us from the administration on stage, I believe, and I think that's the importance of the moment, but also the importance of AEI and the good work that we're doing together, and just add my thanks to wonderful colleagues without whom none of this would be possible. So wonderful to be here. Maybe I'll just set a little frame and then we can get into some of the specifics, which is, as Mira described, we've been at this for 3.5 years, and this will be the Secretary's 11th trip to the Indo-Pacific. But these are going to be phenomenally consequential 10 days for our defense ties in the Indo-Pacific, starting with the Secretary's departure out to Japan. He will be starting off, as Zack mentioned, doing a trilateral defense ministerial with Minister Shin and Minister Kihara from Japan, from ROK in Japan, in Tokyo. That will be the first time our three defense ministers have ever met in Tokyo, or in Seoul for that matter. So this is, I think, an incredible expression of political courage and leadership in Tokyo and Seoul. It's an incredible expression of the leadership from the White House and President Biden and Mira and her team, and really, again, where we are in this moment and the enduring nature of this trilateral configuration. So really historic meeting that will be kicking off on Sunday morning. We will then transition to a 2+2 with our Japanese counterparts, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin. We have a lot of really important alliance deliverables that we can dig into in a little bit more detail, and then we will be having, subsequent to that, the first ever ministerial level discussion with the Japanese on extended deterrence, also in that 2+2 format, really important set of discussions. The following day, we're going to get on the plane. Dan will get more frequent flyer miles.
Indeed.
We're going to fly down to Manila. And then the next day, we'll be holding a 2+2 with the Philippines. Again, really, really important set of discussions, some historic announcements being prepared about our support for the Philippines. And then we will return to Washington, head out to Annapolis and the Naval Academy early the following week for our 2+2 with Australia. So, and all of this will be building on the foundations of the work over the last couple years. And we've made a lot of progress, but you know what, we're taking all of these relationships to the next level. So again, happy to get into the details on the Japan visit, but if you want to give Dan a second to preview his trip as well before we dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dan, you've got both of those 2+2s, and then of course Osman when you're back.
Then
but
we
in
have a couple of
between,
other things to
you've
take
got a
care
bunch
of
of other
before then.
stops,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So why don't you walk people through
That
the
would be
plan?
great. Well, again, let me express my thanks to Kori and Zack as well and to AEI for organizing this. And I also really want to praise my colleagues and good friends, Mira and Ely. The most satisfying part of this job is working with wonderful, talented colleagues. I spend more time with Ely and Mira than I do with my family. So I'm glad that we like and respect one another. And the second most satisfying part of this job is building relationships of trust with our foreign counterparts so we can do great things together. And I think we've achieved unprecedented success in doing so. And to foot stomp, I think Mira's brilliant framing. We always talk about at the State Department, we're investing in the collective capacity of allies, partners, and friends. And the regional architecture that Mira talked about, my favorite word is we're building a lattice work of an interlocking network of relationships, formal and informal, that advances our shared interests across the region. I'm really proud that the Secretary's trip, which will commence, we believe, tomorrow, will be his 17th trip in this administration to the Indo-Pacific, which is pretty extraordinary. We will travel, before we dive in on the 2+2s, we'll travel to Vientiane, Laos for a range of ASEAN-related meetings. We're fully committed to ASEAN. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations is a key part of the regional architecture. The 10 countries of Southeast Asia comprise the world's fourth largest economy, 650 million people, the youngest, most dynamic, fastest growing region of the world. We've upgraded our partnership with ASEAN to a comprehensive strategic partnership. But when the Secretary goes, he'll demonstrate that we're all in on ASEAN as an institution and all in on our partnerships across the region. We have a comprehensive partnership with Laos. We've upgraded our partnerships with Vietnam, with Indonesia, and others. But I think you'll see us also demonstrate that we're going to continue to do practical things with ASEAN so that we make real tangible investments on the ground across Southeast Asia. Because ASEAN is the region's architecture as well, I think you'll probably see us conduct a number of bilats with the region's leaders there as well. We intend to stop briefly in Hanoi as well while we're in the region to pay our respects to General Secretary Win Fu-chom, who passed away recently. A pretty extraordinary leader who oversaw an historic upgrade of our partnership and friendship with Vietnam during his tenure. And we intend to go and pay our respects. Then we will link up with Ely and Secretary Austin in Japan to do the 2+2. When I talk about Japan and what Japan has become and what our alliance has become, it's quite emotional for me. 30 years ago, my first assignment as a diplomat was in Tokyo. Security matters were so sensitive at the time, it felt as if we could barely talk, certainly publicly, about the defense of Japan. Now, Japan has become a regional and global leader, and our alliance has truly become global. And I think you'll see that on display at the 2+2. We're going to take this alliance to the next level, and we're going to contribute benefits and public goods across the region and across the world in pretty historic ways. We'll then go on to Manila. It'll be the first 2+2 we've ever done in Manila. And I think Ely said it well. There'll be some historic announcements and demonstration of our investment in the Philippines and upgrading their capacity. We'll go on to Singapore to meet with the new Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, Minister Mentor Lee Hsien Loong, the Foreign Minister Balakrishnan, and celebrate, I think, Singapore's really important role in our strategic partnership. We'll then go to Mongolia. It's sort of Mongolia week here at the State Department. We just hosted the Foreign Minister for the first comprehensive strategic dialogue. And now the Secretary will follow up by going to UB to meet with her and the leadership there. And then, of course, we'll come back and do the Osman. So I hope we're demonstrating to you that we fundamentally believe that our future security and prosperity is inextricably tied to the Indo-Pacific, that we have elevated our relationships and partnerships to unprecedented levels, and we're making real investments that deliver tangible benefits to the region and to the American people. I think that's what the next week to 10 days will be all about.
So now I can answer your question if you want.
Well, so Eli set a really high bar for himself because the last time he was here for a public event, he made a statement that made my jaw drop, which was that this was going to be, I think you said this a year and a half ago, it was going to be the biggest year for posture in Asia in a generation. And I remember thinking, oh, he's going to regret that. But you didn't.
But he didn't.
So why don't we talk a little bit about some of what's going on? Obviously, a lot in Philippines, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But let's stick on Japan. So we've heard about command and control changes. I know it may not be time yet to go through and detail what those might be. Extended deterrence. What are some of the top agenda items?
Yep, great. So happy to then go from sort of the strategy level down into the doing, what Secretary Austin likes to call hard government work. So we'll be addressing a few really critical topics at the 2+2. You mentioned command and control. As many folks in the room are likely tracking, when the Prime Minister Kishida was here for the state visit in April, he and President Biden announced our intention to modernize our command and control frameworks. This is in the context of Japan developing its own new Joint Operations Command. And our leaders looked to this 2+2 as an important milestone in advancing that discussion. Now, we have been hard at work on that. As the Secretary Austin has said a number of times, we want to get this right. And we have been in deep consultation and analysis inside the department, with Indo-PACOM, in the interagency, with our Japanese colleagues, with Capitol Hill, making sure that the types of proposals that we're thinking about putting forward make sense and align with the overall intent. So that's what we've been doing since April for the last several months. I have nothing to announce today, but I know folks are watching this very carefully, and they should be, and really looking forward to Sunday. Let me just build on that and maybe just a couple more Japan things, and then we can dig back into this. Other things that we've been working on in the defense lane, one is defense industrial base cooperation. One thing we have learned over the last several years is that we need to grow the pie of our collective defense industrial base to ensure we have the capability and capacity that we need to maintain peace and stability in the region. Another major deliverable out of the Prime Minister's visit to the President in April was setting up a new forum to engage in deeper defense industrial base cooperation projects, and we'll be announcing some specifics on the way forward on some of those. In addition, on the posture front, I will recall what I said last year or the December before, was that 2023 would be the most consequential year for U.S. force posture in East Asia in a generation. It was, and we are continuing to build on that work, and we'll keep doing that with our Japanese friends in terms of implementing some of the posture initiatives we've already announced, and continuing in particular in the Southwest Islands to think about how we can expand our cooperation there. So those are some of the main highlights. We mentioned the extended deterrence dialogue, which will be really important to begin those conversations at the ministerial level.
So I think the work that you all have done to deepen those relationships with partners in Asia Pacific is actually the most consequential success of the Biden administration. I think it's hugely important. I wonder, though, since the last, Eli, please correct me if I'm wrong, the last 4 or 5 Indo-PACOM commanders have had the same force structure. And it looks like we are attempting to compensate for deficiencies in force structure with posture. How do you address the adequacy of forces to carry out the strategy in the Pacific?
Well, that would be a question for Admiral Paparo to answer in particular. I believe that he would assert that he has the forces that he needs, but also that we are putting some of our most advanced capabilities into the Indo-Pacific. So that critique may have been true for a period of time. I will say when we are looking at the defense strategy, which also, like the Indo-Pacific strategy, has remained the lodestar of the administration. It prioritized the PRC as the pacing challenge. The budgets from the department have been the most strategy-aligned budgets in the department's history, and they have focused on capabilities necessary to manage the China challenge. So we are investing in those for the long term, but also for the short term, and will be and have been putting capabilities into the region to update our force structure as well.
Can I mention, we could spend an hour easily on each of these topics, but we don't have an hour to do that. So I want to jump over to the Philippines, which is something that I know all three of you have spent a huge amount of time
Zack,
on.
before we jump to
recently.
it, can I mention one thing that I neglected at the outset that we're going to do in Japan? We're going to do a quad foreign ministerial as well, which I think is quite significant. And again, you talk about building that lattice work. I think the quad has really been an historic achievement in this administration that contributes to what we're talking about. But happy to dive in on the Philippines as well.
Absolutely. No, and I mean, it's pretty incredible the amount of engagements you're all trying to manage the next week or two. So on the Philippines, obviously you've said there are going to be some historic announcements, which is great. Love to hear a little bit more about those, but also Second Thomas Shoal. I know all three of you spent huge amounts of time on this. You know, Dan been in Vietnam for years. Ely worked on this before you were back in government. And Mira, you know, did a lot of the early work on bringing to light what was actually going on in the South China Sea before going into government. So where are we on Second Thomas Shoal? It seems like there's some sort of agreement between Manila and Beijing, although the exact terms of those agreements don't seem to be clear to most of us on the outside. How do you feel are we working closely enough with Manila on the strategy going forward, and how much of that is a priority for you in the trip to the Philippines?
I'm happy to perhaps tee off and then welcome Ely and Dan joining in. So to answer the second part of your question, our coordination with Manila across the board, but including on Second Thomas Shoal, is unprecedented and has really been revolutionized in recent months. And I think our top line answer would be one of tremendous praise for our Philippines allies and their handling of an incredibly challenging situation in their own exclusive economic zone over the course of the last year. President Marcos and his team have handled the situation with extraordinary resolve, have handled it responsibly, steadily, and again, in incredibly close coordination with the United States. And from the Philippines' perspective, part of that has been an effort to take the temperature down through some very responsible bilateral diplomacy with the PRC, and we commend that instinct as well. As you referenced, Zack, there has been an announcement that out of their bilateral coordination mechanism, they have reached an understanding about future resupplies at Second Thomas Shoal. But we want to be very clear about where the United States stands on this issue, and that is very much with our Philippines allies. In no uncertain terms, it is the case under international law that Second Thomas Shoal lies in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. That was recognized by the Permanent Court of Arbitration 8 years ago this month, and because of that, the PRC has no lawful claim to the waters around 2TS. Additionally, as the National Security Advisor said out at Aspen this weekend, the United States continues to stand ready to do whatever is necessary to support the Philippines on this issue and more broadly. And as we've been clear so many times, including up to the president's level in the Rose Garden on multiple occasions, the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty applies to the South China Sea and applies to public vessels, including those of its Coast Guard. So the applicability of our Mutual Defense Treaty is crystal clear. What we are looking to do across the board, and Ely can speak much more to this, is to bolster our Philippines allies' capabilities and ability to continue to operate lawfully in its waters and to stand up to the types of challenges that it has faced in recent months. And we think that we're well on our way to doing that. This alliance is really firing on absolutely every cylinder, and just a few years ago, its future was incredibly uncertain. So as we look to Second Thomas Shoal or any number of other features that lie near the Philippine shores and at which it sees increasing contest from the PRC, we're taking a holistic perspective to bolster Manila and our partnership with Manila however we can. And you'll see a lot of those important steps in one announcement in particular coming out of the 2+2 that will light the way.
Maybe just to buttress what Mira said, I agree obviously with everything that she said. If you take a step back, the context, of course, is the fact that the PRC continues to use coercive measures to advance its national interests, really across almost every domain, and certainly in the maritime domain. You think about the thousands of acres of reclaimed land across features in the South China Sea, and now, of course, this unprecedented harassment of Philippines' resupply efforts to the Sierra Madre at Second Thomas Shoal. Really been unprecedented, deeply concerning, and as Mira outlined, the United States continues to demonstrate that we are committed to ensuring that the Philippines is able to maintain the status quo since 1999, which is their ability to peacefully resupply the Sierra Madre at Second Thomas Shoal. And of course, as Mira said, our mutual defense treaty obligations are crystal clear and ironclad. We do welcome the diplomacy between Manila and Beijing. You've all seen the announcements. This is a sovereign Philippine matter. They've conducted this diplomacy. As Mira said, I think they've done so very responsibly. The key will now be on implementation, so we'll have to watch very carefully.
And then maybe just tying it back to the 2+2 and how some of these issues fit in, that'll be a good opportunity to talk with the full Philippines leadership, including hoping to have a meeting with between Secretary Austin, Secretary Blinken, and President Marcos as well. Yes, exactly. On the margin. So we'll have a chance to talk to many of the leaders, top leadership in the Philippines about what their current thinking is on some of these issues. But again, stepping back, we're making extraordinary strides, as Mira described, in this relationship, and Dan as well, that we are on track to engage in some unprecedented support for the modernization of the AFP, the Armed Forces of the Philippines. In addition to that, one of the things we've been working on that will be talked about more at the 2+2 is what we were calling a security sector assistance roadmap. This is not only that the United States is seeking to support the Philippines, but actually that we're working bilaterally to have shared understanding about the specific capabilities that are most important for their national funds and for our support to make sure that their investments are, and our investments are being used to the best for Philippines defense, sovereignty, and security. In addition, on the posture front, we have received the finalized diplomatic notes that now completes the full arrangement for the 4 new EDCA sites that were announced last year, and this will allow us to expand our discussions about what are we going to be doing in those locations and how are we going to be operating in the Philippines. Of course, the United States does not have permanent bases in the Philippines, but we do have access to Philippine locations through the EDCA arrangement. So we'll be talking about how we'll be building upon those, including with other departments and agencies in the US government, which is a really exciting innovation. And then, as Mira mentioned, the mini-lateral work that we're doing, what Dan has described as the lattice work, what Secretary Austin described in his Shangri-La dialogue speech as the new convergence. We'll be talking about with our Philippine allies about how are we bringing together allies like Australia, like Japan, and others on issues related to operational coordination, maritime domain awareness, force posture, a number of really exciting opportunities that are opened up not just by the strengthening of the US-Philippines relationship, but by the strengthening of relationships in the region. And I think that is such an important part of the regional security dynamic. We see countries investing in their own security. We see them putting out a very strong demand signal for American partnership and leadership, but also just the really powerful connectivity between themselves. The Philippines has signed just recently a reciprocal access agreement with Japan. They have a pre-existing one with Australia. Philippines developing stronger relationships with countries not only in the region, but also in Europe, and we want to build upon all of that. So really exciting and frankly concrete opportunities on the way forward, and we'll have a chance to talk about those at the 2+2 as well.
I think that's really important. Dan, can I ask you, you said we're going to be, that the US is all in on ASEAN. What does that actually mean? What, besides showing up, are we going to encouraged to be done in ASEAN that we wouldn't have encouraged before?
Yeah, thank you, Kori. Look, first, I think it means recognizing that our future lies not just with the broad Indo-Pacific, but specifically with the 10 countries of Southeast Asia. I said earlier, collectively, the world's fourth largest economy, probably the youngest, most dynamic, rapidly growing place on Earth, 650 million people. We talk about the shared future of our 1 billion people. So first, it's that recognition of how important ASEAN is. It's also investing in ASEAN as an institution. Some people complain that because ASEAN is a consensus-based organization, it's too slow, it's too inefficient. But I would argue ASEAN is contributing tremendously to the stability across Southeast Asia. And consensus-based organizations, they cut both ways. Sometimes they're not the most rapidly moving innovative organizations, but they're also a check on rapid and destabilizing changes as well. So we believe in the institution as an entity and as a framework, and we'll continue to invest in it. And then, of course, we can't ignore the partnerships that we have with the key member states across Southeast Asia, certainly Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand. I could go across the board. And even with Laos, I think about we're coming up on next year to be a decade since we launched our comprehensive partnership. And even there, I think we've made tremendous progress. When Secretary Blinken is there, he'll talk with his ASEAN counterparts. We do have an annual plan of action. We actually have a 5-year plan of action with ASEAN in which we've agreed that the United States, together with ASEAN and the member states, will invest in the key issues that confront our friends in Southeast Asia, from climate change to all of the issues happening in the maritime domain across Southeast Asia, to investing in infrastructure, technology, and the like. So that's a snapshot of our agenda. And then, of course, because ASEAN provides that framework, I think you'll see it as an opportunity for the Secretary to conduct some important bilateral diplomacy as well. Hope that helps.
Perfect. Well, one aspect of bilateral diplomacy, not with ASEAN, but perhaps in ASEAN in the next week, could be on the China side.
Sure.
Wang Yi, it sounds like, is going to be in Laos. And so, there potentially could be an opportunity for a meeting between Secretary Blinken and Wang Yi. Can you say anything about, whether that might happen, and if it were to happen, what an agenda might look like for a meeting of that sort?
Absolutely, delighted to. Thank you, Zack. I think the Secretary Blinken himself spoke to this when he was in Aspen, and I mentioned it to the press a couple of days ago. It's pretty natural for when the Secretary and his Chinese counterparts are together in a multilateral setting that they would find an opportunity to meet and engage, and that's certainly our intention. This time while we're in Vientiane, don't have anything to announce today, but stand by to see if that would happen. I'll mention a couple of other things, maybe just taking a step back. Really agree with what Mira said at the top. We have a regional strategy, and we have a regional strategy of which China is a part and not the other way around. So our primary focus is on allies and partners. But even when we engage with the Chinese, I remember Master Rich Armitage always has said that if you want to get China right, you got to get the region right. And so we focused first and foremost on making sure that we've strengthened our allied and partner relationships. We talk about our approach to China as invest, align, compete, investing in our sources of strength at home. Most importantly, that align piece, aligning with allies and partners. And then, of course, competing across a range of domains. I think the U.S.-China partnership, the U.S.-China relationship is clearly competitive. That's the primary defining feature of the relationship. But we're also committed to responsibly managing that competition. I think the main outcome from the summit between President Biden and President Xi at Woodside, California last year was a commitment that we are going to responsibly manage this relationship. We're going to seek areas of cooperation where it's in our interest to do so. And in the range of challenges that we face, we're going to keep open channels of communication so that at a bare minimum, we reduce the risk of miscalculation. I think a natural agenda for the Secretary and Wang Yi, if they're able to sit down, would be to walk through that understanding coming out of Woodside. There are some limited areas of cooperation, particularly on counter-narcotics, which I think are that's probably the single most important area where the United States and China need to work together and are working together. Interestingly, I think opening up our mill channels with China has delivered some benefits as well. There'll be a few other things that we discuss. But if we're being really honest here, the most important business we have to do is manage the challenges that we face. We talked about the challenges in the maritime domain. That's quite clear. We're deeply concerned about China's ongoing aggressive and destabilizing support of Russia's illegal, unprovoked war against Ukraine, particularly China's support for the Russian defense industrial base. We certainly have a range of concerns about steps that China is taking to increase pressure on Taiwan and to direct coercion at Taiwan in ways that threaten to undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And then there are a range of economic and trade measures that China continues to carry out that we believe are unfair and distortionary. So that hopefully gives you a sense of what an agenda would look like should the Secretary and Wang Yi have a chance to sit down together. My single favorite line that I've heard on China is from National Security Advisor, who always talks about intense competition with China requires intense diplomacy. We do believe in that. We don't apologize for the competitive relationship that we have and the competitive actions that we take vis-a-vis China to advance our national interests. But I do want to reassure everybody here, and we reassure friends in the region, we are going to conduct this competition in the most responsible way the most responsible way possible, and we're going to reassure our allies and partners of that fact, and I think that will be reassuring across the region.
I think one of the hardest relationships to get the balance right on is India. And I think there was a fair amount of surprise at Prime Minister Modi's trip to Moscow. How do you think about the balance of how much we should, how central do you consider India to getting the region right? And how do you think we are doing on the balance of keeping India cooperative where possible without foreclosing things they clearly are insistent on for themselves? Mira, I'd love to hear your answer to this.
So I'm inclined to defer to Eli first because he is actually the only one who has India in his portfolio, although I work very closely with our Indian friends through the Quad.
Why don't you start and then
Okay.
I'll follow.
Sounds good. So it's a really important question. I think important to rewind the tape a little bit to what the relationship with India looked like 5 years ago. And the answer is nothing like what it looks like today, right? For our Indian friends, the clash in the Himalayas that took place in 2020 with the PRC was a transformative moment in their strategy and in their foreign policy. And it's hard to understate how significant that was. In the years since, we have seen our relationship, certainly on security and defense, but really across the board, with India absolutely transformed. And you can see that on a bilateral level, where of course the president's state visit with Modi last year announced some really unprecedented cooperation, certainly in the defense space, but also in the critical and emerging technology space. You can see that on the minilateral level, where India is in many ways the driving force behind the Quad, not only helping to set the agenda, but carving out space for new and different types of projects that the Quad will work on together in the spirit of delivering for the region. And you can also see it in the choices that our Indian friends make in terms of their own partnerships around the region, many of which have nothing to do with us. As Eli was describing before, increasingly closer ties with East Asia, with Japan, with Australia, with Vietnam, and even some recent statements in favor of the Philippines in light of the pressure that they are facing in the South China Sea. So I really do think the shifts that we have seen in New Delhi are incredibly significant, and the partnerships that we have been able to build as a result, again, would have been just impossible to imagine 5 years ago. That said, what we are seeking to build is a long-term partnership, and we are not expecting sort of revolutionary change to occur overnight. Not every partner needs to be exactly the same in terms of their orientation orientation, and there is not one sort of single archetype for the end state in either a bilateral partnership with the United States or in the way that we engage in our minilaterals. So mostly when we look at India, we look at this incredible amount of progress that we have been able to make together, even as there are clearly some alignment patterns that we do not share. But I'll pass it to Eli.
Yeah, Kori, what I would say is, look, we talk a lot about our shared vision with the region, with our allies and partners for a free and open Indo-Pacific. I would argue that the U.S.-India partnership is essential to the development of that vision, that shared vision, but also that the U.S.-India partnership is essential for India's aspirations for itself and for its role in South Asia. And so we have been working together on a number of regional issues. We've also been working together to deepen our defensive partnership, to deepen our defense industrial base cooperation. It's a major theme throughout the region, but in some ways, our work with India has been path-breaking in that regard. They have their own aspirations toward a stronger, more indigenous defense industrial base that will reduce their reliance on foreign partners like Russia. We think that's a good thing. We want to work with them. They can become stronger themselves. They can also become a net security provider to the region. So we have been working with them closely. We recognize part of their foreign policy orientation is one toward multipolarity. That can sometimes lead to difficult conversations, but that's what these kind of partnerships are all about. But Mira is absolutely right. The overall trend of the U.S.-India defense partnership is incredibly strong, and it's something we're deeply invested in.
And if I can just put a fine point on Eli's comment, sorry to jump back in. What we wrote in the Indo-Pacific strategy as our objective for the U.S.-India partnership and for India as a whole was that India increasingly be a regional leader that was also increasingly aligned with the United States. And that's exactly to Eli's point that not only is this relationship essential for us and for the region that we seek, but it's essential for India. And I do think that on both of those metrics, India's role as a regional leader and India's alignment with the United States, we've made significant progress since the IPS was published.
Questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Michael Martina from Reuters. Thank you for all being here. Appreciate it. Two questions I wanted to follow up on things that you mentioned. The first with Second Thomas Shoal. We're in a situation, presumably, where the Philippines is perhaps providing notification to China, which had been one of their asks. I'm wondering if the U.S., if you had at all urged or suggested to the Philippines to make this agreement with China, and whether over the long term there's any risk of that having a sort of a negative effect on deterrence if China comes to the assumption that it can get a foreign country to negotiate or to provide notifications over how it operates in its own waters. And then Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink, you mentioned the passing of the leader in Vietnam. Is there any concern that China might use this leadership transition there to try to exploit that relationship and get Vietnam to move closer to China? And how would you approach that? Is the issue of Vietnam's non-market economy status part of that calculus? Thanks very much.
Do you want me to take an initial stab at both of those? So, Michael, first on Second Thomas Shoal, I guess what I would say is this is a Philippine sovereign matter, and the Philippines has been clear both with us and then in public as well that they're in the lead. They've been in the lead on the resupply operations. They conducted this diplomacy, and our role has been to support them in every way that we can. We've welcomed the diplomacy that they've conducted. I think the focus will be on implementation. We're all watching very carefully, but I think we have to leave it to our Filipino allies to determine how best to defend their national interests that are at stake. Nobody is more clear-minded on that than leaders in Manila. We, as their treaty ally, are making crystal clear to friends in Manila and across the region our commitment to them. I think I'll probably leave it at that. My colleagues may want to jump in. On Vietnam, I guess I would say a couple of things. First of all, our partnership with Vietnam is intrinsically important in and of itself. We, of course, share a very special history with Vietnam. And the most meaningful part, I think, for someone like me who's had an opportunity to work on this relationship, to see the dramatic progress that we've made. We've overcome much of our tragic history. We haven't forgotten it, but we've worked to advance past that. We've built an unprecedented level of strategic trust with our partners and friends in Hanoi. And I think it's that trust that led to the upgrade to the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And one of the reasons why Secretary Blinken is committed to go to Hanoi to pay our respects to General Secretary Win Fu Chom is because he, over his 13 years as the General Secretary, really oversaw that unprecedented upgrade. So that's the primary focus. I have a lot of respect for friends in Hanoi. I think they're among the clearest strategic thinkers that I've ever met. I think their history and geography has taught them that they know best how to defend their national interest and how to balance against the various challenges that they face. Underscoring the themes that we've been trying to present here today. What's our focus with Vietnam? Our focus is demonstrating to Vietnam and to this region that we're committed to this partnership. We're committed to investing in our shared interests and our collective capacity to advance those shared interests and invest in the rules-based order. I'll leave to friends in Hanoi to describe whatever concerns that they may have, but our focus will remain squarely on our partnership with Vietnam and everything we're doing in a range of domains, in the economic, trade, and infrastructure space, in the security space where we're making unprecedented advancements, and also in the clean energy and technology space. So I think I would encourage you to focus on what we're doing with Vietnam rather than looking at the other regional challenges they face.
Nick Schifrin.
Hi guys, thanks so much for doing this. Great to see you at this event, at this institution. Two questions for you, and I'll try and distribute the questions. One, if one of the explicit goals is to deter China from invading Taiwan, seems to me we've talked about two of the major means of doing that, both the military posture that Eli, you were talking about, and Kori was getting to too, but also the lattice work of alliances that all of you have talked about. The third part, perhaps the first part, the most important part, is Taiwan itself. So I know you won't be able to give specifics, but Eli, if you could at least talk a little bit about how important it has been to try and work with Taiwan itself and push its own decisions about how it can or it should defend the island, and U.S. assistance in that. And then number two, maybe for Mira and Dan, you guys have made some strides on infrastructure development, undersea cables, for example. But when you expand the aperture to trade, with all due respect, I think you'd both admit IPEF has not been exactly what you were hoping it for. So if you were to have more time, if you were, for example, to win the election and have more time, how would you actually, how would you actually follow through on something and expand the trade that so many of the partners you are working with, frankly, are demanding and really do expect if you guys do continue? Thanks.
Nick always asks easy questions.
Yeah. Why don't you start with the second one? I'll come back.
Happy to. So, as you indicate, I think we have made not only some important progress under IPEF. I would point to the supply chain pillar, which has really been taken up with enthusiasm by our IPEF partners. But outside of IPEF, I think we have radically improved our ability to work with like-minded partners to deliver actual real investment projects that matter to the region. So just some recent examples to point to, a Google cable, submarine cable that is currently being built in the South Pacific, in which we, the Australians, the Japanese, now the Kiwis, and indeed Taiwan are all participating to provide secure, incredibly high quality connectivity to the Pacific Islands, a few of whom had no submarine cable landing stations before this project, right? And this project emerged basically last September, and our ability to cobble partners together to pick up pieces of it is unlike anything we were able to do 2 years ago. And obviously, close cooperation with the private sector and having such a great option as Google has been a huge part of the attractiveness of that project. But we've also really picked up the pace on directing private sector investment through government-led infrastructure efforts, namely PGI, where we announced at the US-Japan Philippines trilateral in April that we would be standing up something called the Luzon Corridor, which is now directing private sector investment to a corridor in the Philippines that will include things like major port renovations, rail connections, digital infrastructure, and clean energy supply chains. And this is not only an area where the United States government is now working overtime to direct private sector investment, but it's an area in which our Japanese friends have very easily clicked in because they were already doing so much good private sector investment in the Philippines, and they've really taken up the mantle to implement this corridor with us. So examples of the fact that outside of IPEF, we really can get a lot done. That said, we think there is a lot more promise still in IPEF, and our partners remain committed to taking it forward. So we look forward to working on that with them. And of course, to the question of, if we had more time or what might come next, as you're probably tracking, as of 72 hours ago, we have a new presidential candidate. So we would have to sort of see what the objectives would be as that vision really takes shape. But this is all to say that what we have sort of trained ourselves to do alongside others has vastly improved, and we believe that high quality, high standard investment is always going to be the United States hallmark and calling card. And the question is how we can accelerate our efforts, in particular, to bring it to Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. Dan, anything you want to add?
Maybe just a comment or to agree with all of that. Obviously, I do think that the biggest need in the region is related to strategic infrastructure, and that's really where we've been focusing our efforts and everything that Mira has outlined. I think that's probably the most critical work going forward. When I had the opportunity to talk about and defend the president's budget requests for the coming year, it talked about one of, I think, the most exciting parts of that request is a $4 billion mandatory request, which would include $2 billion for a global infrastructure fund and $2 billion for building this strategic connectivity across the Indo-Pacific that we're talking about here. So I think that's where IPEF and the PGI IPEF Investment Accelerator, Luzon Corridor, other work has probably been most impactful. And maybe just a final point. Whatever friends across the region may say or may not say about the state of our formal trade agenda, I think you can't ignore certain fundamentals that remain true and will only continue to grow. We have $2 trillion in annual trade between the United States and the Indo-Pacific. We have $1 trillion of American investment across the region. We're far and away the largest regional investor. And there's almost $1 trillion of regional investment in the United States as well. So that's why we talk about the fact that our security and prosperity are inextricably tied to what happens in the Indo-Pacific.
Dan, if you've got 5 more minutes on that, I don't have to answer the time question. So invite round 2, but I'm happy to.
And we do have 2 more questions I'm
Okay.
going to try and fit in.
Okay, I will be as brief as possible then on Taiwan, but I think there are important things to reiterate here, because key for folks in the region and to understand this. Number one, our policy has not changed. We continue to support the status quo, and we oppose unilateral changes to the status quo. In addition to that, you have heard department leaders say a number of times, we believe deterrence is real and deterrence is strong today, and we're working hard every day to keep it that way, and we believe an invasion of Taiwan is neither imminent nor inevitable. And Secretary Austin has described that a number of times. Now, on the deterrence question, what is the work that we are doing in the department? And of course, this is a whole government effort in terms of our partnership with Taiwan. Nick, you described some of those elements. The way I would articulate them in terms of how we continue to sustain deterrence, number one, through capabilities, also concepts. Some of the operational concepts that are being developed, really innovative inside the department to deal with some of the operational challenges we face in the Western Pacific, and I think we're making great progress in that regard, and spoke a little bit earlier to Kori's question about some of the new capabilities that we're putting into the region to deal with some of those challenges and to reinforce deterrence. Second, you mentioned force posture. We are in the process of making our force posture in the Western Pacific more distributed, more mobile, more resilient, and more lethal, and all of that will contribute to deterrence. And then finally, you mentioned the part related to allies and partners. Dan and I were on the stage, I believe in Brookings last year. I really liked what he said insofar as the entire world has a stake in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, and I think we are seeing the manifestation of that in our private and public diplomacy every day in terms of more and more countries around the world expressing the importance of maintaining stability in the Taiwan Strait. So that's a really important part of the deterrence equation. But as you mentioned, absolutely, Taiwan has a role in that as well, including in bolstering their own resilience, not just from a military perspective, but from a whole of society perspective. And I'm encouraged by the trend lines on that issue, and in terms of their own efforts as it relates to the Taiwan military to make sure they have the right plans, capabilities, exercises to strengthen deterrence and to maintain peace and stability. So I think we're on a very strong trajectory on all those regards.
So there are questions in the room we are unfortunately not going to get to. I want to take one of the online question, which is, can the panelists comment on the main focus of discussion regarding North Korea and North Korean-Russian cooperation?
Okay, happy to do it. As folks are well tracking, Putin recently paid a visit to Pyongyang, and in many ways, that visit between Kim and Putin cemented what has been taking place over the course of this last year, which is a really unprecedented level of cooperation between the DPRK and Russia, which is extremely troubling to us and should be worrisome to any country or individual who sees a stake in peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific or in the Euro-Atlantic. And we see in many ways this relationship as a paradigm of the increasing links between the two regions, as the DPRK has sold missiles and ammunition to Russia for battlefield use in Ukraine, and the use of those munitions are well documented. But also, as Russia clearly provides both political support, technical assistance, cash, and other forms of bolstering of the Kim regime to North Korea in exchange for its battlefield support. Now, in the early months of that relationship, one might have been able to make an argument that perhaps this was a transactional relationship, perhaps that once Russia no longer needed the DPRK on the battlefield in Ukraine to supplant its stores, that perhaps the political relationship would fade too. But with Putin's visit and with the alliance-like agreement that they have signed, I think it is very clear that the DPRK and Russia have bought into a longer-term partnership that we have to reckon with as a fundamental force in both regions. Now, the silver linings that we could point to in this. Number one, unprecedented Japan ROK US cooperation to monitor this relationship and to coordinate policy to do our best to oppose and undermine it where we can. We have unprecedented intelligence sharing, unprecedented cooperation on sanctions, unprecedented cooperation on how we deal with this issue at the UN, and increasingly, and here's a second silver lining, unprecedented engagement from European partners who also want to do what they can to bolster both regions against this partnership. And that was on full display at NATO. But nonetheless, it truly presents an unprecedented challenge, and the main concern is, of course, that with Russian access to cash and technical advice, North Korea is the least isolated that it has been in a very long time. And so that is something that we must all be worried about and cooperate against. Nonetheless, the United States remains open to diplomacy. If the Kim regime should decide that they want to talk now, today, without preconditions about anything, we're prepared to do so because we think that diplomacy can play a responsible role in managing the risks that we see here. But we remain laser focused on deepening our cooperation, in particular with our Japanese and ROK counterparts on all issues related to North Korea, and again, to increasingly folding in our European partners who see their stake as well.
My friends, won't you join me in thanking these three great American public servants for the conversation today and for their good work for our country.
Thank you, Kori. Well, thanks to all of you.
4, what am I thinking? I left you out.